My name is Helen Zille, and I'm a member of Dagbreek Student Affairs. I'll be your master of ceremonies for the night. Welcome to Dagbreek Student Affairs' official launch of Inkululeko, Talking Freedom. Inkululeko is a booklet that describes an open society as envisaged by the Constitution of South Africa and provides an alternative to identity politics and critical race theory. By coming here tonight, you are already starting to form part of the important discussion of how we can reimagine dialogue and debate on campus. Dagbreek believes that we have an important role to play in student affairs, critical engagement, and dialogue on campus. Tonight, we will exhibit our largest contribution to student affairs in recent history. This project, we hope, will transcend Stellenbosch University and reach other campuses in South Africa and hopefully the world. But our focus tonight is on South Africa, our wonderful constitution, and this campus. It is an honor to have you here with us, and we thank you for making the effort. Our guest speaker for the evening is, of course, none other than Premier Helen Zille. It is an immense privilege to have her here, and we could not be more excited to hear what she has to say on this occasion. Before Premier Zille gives her speech, I'll call on Tiaan Alberts, the House Committee member of Dagbreek Student Affairs, on the stage to explain the intention of Inkululeko and to elaborate on the reasons why this booklet was brought into existence. Before Premier Zille will deliver the keynote speech on the importance of open society on our campus, and after that, there will be an open question and answers session. I now call on our Harper for Student Affairs, Tiaan Alberts, on stage to explain the drive behind the booklet. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tiaan Alberts.
Good evening, Premier Zille, special guests, and fellow Marties. Universities have existed over millennia, not for the purpose of endowing students with degrees, but to allow for the exchange of ideas and the imparting of knowledge. In that spirit, Dagbreek Student Affairs invited you tonight, because we would like to exchange with you, as it has been exchanged with us in the past, ideas about our campus, our country, and our world. The booklet that you will receive when you leave tonight represents a compilation of ideas about our world and our country and our campus, ideas about an open society and freedom. And with the great honor tonight to have a guest speaker that has dedicated almost their entire life to fighting for freedom and justice, to elaborate on the concepts of open society and freedom. Wanneer ons oor groot woorde soos vryheid praat, kan ons nie anders as om ons land se grondwet in te roep nie. Dit is die fondasie waarop ons vryhede wat ons vandag kan geniet tot stand gekom het. Dit is die rede hoekom ek en jy van ons opinie kan lig sonder om vervolg te word. In the spirit of our country's constitution, Inkululeko has been written. Inkululeko elaborates on an open society in which the individual is the core unit of value. A society in which freedom of speech is a foundational value that is necessary for progress. This means equally free speech for everyone, not certain groups, not certain people. And this is exactly where campuses in the world, and especially in South Africa, have lost the plot. Contrary to the values of an open society, universities in South Africa have embraced the type of identity politics that assigns value to ideas based on the identity of the person espousing the view. Also the type of identity politics that lumps people together in groups and assigns the groups to a hierarchy of oppression and privilege. And who gets to determine who's privileged and who's oppressed? Self-assigned moral heroes who make decisions on behalf of other people and decide for them how they should feel and how they should interpret the world and injustice. And this is where Inkululeko steps in. It is not only a guide to open society, but in addition, it provides an illustration of the type of world that we find ourselves in when we take open society for granted and embrace identity politics. A world in which language is used to entrench a worldview that is intolerant of alternative analysis or challenge. A world in which genuine, sincere views are shot down as mansplaining or whitesplaining. But Inkululeko never prescribes to its readers what it should believe or support. It contrasts the world that our Constitution has envisioned for us and the world that you find yourself in when group identity, race, gender, and sexuality become the parameters that define our interactions with one another, our discussions, and the merits of our arguments. But students should decide for themselves what paradigm is most conducive for their own freedom and the freedom of our society. Inkululeko skryf nie voor waarna jy moet glo nie, maar kontrasteer eerder die wêreld wat ons grondwet vir ons bedoel het, waarin ons as individue kan sê wat ons wil en glo waarin ons wil en kan identifiseer waarmee ons wil. Ons kontrasteer dit met die tipe samelewing waarin ons nou gewoond raak. Een waarin die kleur van jou vel of jou geslag bepaal hoeveel meriete daar in jou standpunt steek. Inkululeko is not a political statement or an ideological entrenchment. In fact, it merely implies that anybody should be free to make any political statements or pursue any ideology that they want to, regardless of the group identities that they belong to. It outlines your freedom to say whatever the hell you want, preferably in the pursuit of truth. And you know, some people ask me before this event, are you not afraid? Is Dagbreek Student Affairs not afraid to make these statements and to produce this booklet? But why should we be cautious or afraid if it is the duty of all citizens to promote the spirit of our Constitution? This is our way of promoting the spirit of our Constitution, and it is quite frankly incontestable to do so. So the answer goes back that those who seek to undermine the values and the spirit of our Constitution, they should be afraid. The very same freedoms that they seek to undermine, protect them too. Non-racialism and non-sexism, supremacy of the Constitution, and the rule of law are amongst others the values listed in the founding provisions of the Constitution in Section 1. Inkululeko reminds us tonight that these values are not to be disregarded. In the end, you might wonder, what is the value of printing and distributing a booklet that flies in the face of almost every modern assumption about identity and the way that people organize themselves? You might wonder if this booklet might change anything at all, but it's not meant to change our country or our campus. It is meant to break open the monopoly of truth on our campus and in our country that suits an intolerant minority. Inkululeko conveys that there is no established truth, but that the truth is always open for debate. It is meant to spark conversation and to inspire you to do research, to wrap your head around concepts such as open society and identity politics, and to understand how they shape our world, for the good or for the bad. In the end, Inkululeko will be what you make of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tian. Inkululeko will be what you make of it. I urge you to read it, share it, and let it be the spark that takes you further in conversations and debates and broadens your understanding of what's happening on our campus. We don't purport that it has all the answers to all of our challenges in dialogue, but it can certainly bring us together to sit down and have conversations. Now, I am very honored to have been afforded the opportunity to welcome a very special guest for the evening. Helen Zille was born in Hillbrow, Johannesburg, the eldest child of parents who separately left Germany in the 1950s to avoid Nazi persecution. Her mother was a volunteer with Black Sash Advice Office, a movement Helen Zille was actively involved in the 1980s. She also joined several other pro-democracy groups in the 1980s to fight apartheid. While being involved in the End Conscription campaign in the Western Cape, she was arrested for being in a group area without a permit and received a suspended prison sentence. She and her husband later offered their home as a safe house for political activists and were forced into hiding with their 2-year-old son. She studied at the University of Witwatersrand, where she obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree, and started her career as a journalist in the 1970s at the Rand Daily Mail. She famously exposed the cover-up around the death of Black consciousness leader Stevie Biko. Helen has served in all 3 tiers of government as the Western Cape Education MEC from 1999 to 2001, as a Member of Parliament from 2004 to 2006, as the Mayor of Cape Town from 2006 to 2009. Since 2009, she has been the Premier of the Western Cape. Helen was the leader of the opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, between 2007 and 2015, and won the World Mayor Award in October 2008. I could continue listing her numerous accomplishments, but then we'd probably have to sit here till the morning. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcoming Helen Zille.
Baie dankie Suhel vir daai baie warm woorde van verwelkoming. Ek waardeer dit in seeste. En Tiaan, het is ook baie lekker om 'n bietjie Afrikaans ten minste hier te gehoor het. Ek sal nou oorslaan na Engels soos ek gevra is, maar na jou toespraak weet ek nou nie eintlik wat vir my oorbly om te sê. Dit was 'n absolute uitstekende opsomming van die oop geleentheidsgedrewe samelewing wat die essensie van vryheid bewerkstellig, en ek gaan ook 'n bietjie daaroor praat. But I do want to say to you all a very welcome tonight to what will go down, I believe, as an historic occasion. I hope there'll be a lot of questions. I hope they will be very difficult questions, because I like difficult questions. And I hope that that will form the meat of tonight's event. But I'm going to begin by giving a briefish talk. I don't know how brief it's going to be. Well, we're about to find out, because I normally let the spirit take me. But I do want to say to Dagbreek, to the Dagbreek Student Affairs Committee, very, very warm congratulations on producing this outstanding booklet, which I've taken a look at. I have also familiarized myself with Talking Transformation. And the 2 books espouse very different worldviews. It is interesting to me that one of the booklets, Talking Transformation, seems to have been an official publication of the Transformation Committee with the logo of the University of Stellenbosch on it. This booklet, Inkululeko, in contrast, is a project of a student committee at a residence. And it's very interesting that although I know that many beamptes from the university were invited, none of them are here tonight. Now, they may all have had very legitimate reasons for not being here tonight. But I think when we look back in history, you will find that students like the Dagbreek Student Affairs Committee, and people like Tiaan in particular, will be honored and should be honored for the rightful role they are playing to ensure that the university can fulfill its fundamental mission of being a place where ideas are debated rather than having ideologies imposed. A place where the dialectic method is encouraged and sustained, and not a place where people run away from being able to contest a space because it might be seen as politically incorrect or inconvenient at a time, or they might get branded or labelled for taking a position they believe in. And that is why what the Dagbreek students are doing is essentially to protect the very essence of the university. And one day that will be properly recognised. I was at an event at UCT a couple of weeks ago, very interesting event, and one of the students got up and said to me, I really agree with what you're saying, but how can we say this on our campus without being branded, without being marginalised, without being labelled? And I said there are many times in history where reformers and where the real progressives have dared to be labelled and challenged and marginalised and isolated. And how many times in history has that meant that as the wheel turns, they turn out to have been right? And I think that is precisely what will happen here, not because your ideas are necessarily right, but because the very essence of your booklet is to recognise that no ideas are permanently and necessarily right. That the critical thing is to keep open the space for debate around them so that progress can be made towards the truth. The truth is a very interesting concept because I believe no human being can ever reach the truth, but it's our duty to try. And the dialectic method, engaging in argument based on evidence and looking for a resolution to that argument, and then looking for more evidence that may well prove you wrong, is the way that progress is made. Not saying that this is the ideology I stand or fall by and the world better fall within this paradigm or the world is wrong. And so the great risk that the university faces is falling into that paradigm because no one is prepared to stand up to it. And it's interesting to me that a student committee in a university residence does so. And that's pretty historic as far as I can see. And I want to say to you, congratulations. You should be really proud of yourselves. Now, when I looked at the booklets, Talking Transformation and Talking Freedom, it occurred to me immediately that the two concepts should be linked. Because my understanding of transformation is of a society that evolves to the highest level of freedom possible. That's my understanding of transformation. That we as a society evolve to the highest level of freedom possible. And my freedom is not to take a second bottle of water because it's closer. So, what is freedom? Well, it's certainly not what is in the book called Talking Transformation, unfortunately. I've thought a lot about a definition of freedom, because I think it's very important to define our terms. And my definition of freedom is this. And I've worked on this with many other people, as I do with most of my ideas, so this is not an original definition. But I've spent a lot of time discussing this critically important concept because I'm in politics to advance freedom, to advance individual freedom, to advance society's freedom. And so you've obviously got to define your terms. And so I define freedom as having the right, the space, the opportunity, and the means or the wherewithal to live a life you value. Now, every single one of those words is really important. To have the right. Our Constitution establishes that right. You have the right, and every institution established by the Constitution is there to protect your right as an to seek and to live a life you value. Now, Tian was saying that it has taken centuries to evolve the ideas of the open society. But the idea that the state is there to protect and serve the citizen is one of the biggest paradigm shifts in human history. Because previously, the king or the feudal lord or the state was there to be served by the people. And the big shift that the democracy really turned on its head was the notion of people being accountable to the king or the chief or the state or the leader, turned it right round to making the leaders accountable to the people. And the institutions of state to defend people's rights and freedoms. And this evolution happened over many centuries. It's not for nothing that they've just celebrated the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta in Britain, which is the first step in that direction. And much of political evolution since then has been towards the open society to guarantee freedom. And so the right is established in law and in our constitution. A huge jump. Then when I talk about space, what does space mean? It means living in an environment conducive to freedom. So, as the UCT student was saying to me, there's not much space to express the ideas we want to. Well, you've got to create your space, you've got to fight for your space. Not physically, obviously, and not violently, but you've got to stand up because you're protected by the right to do so and claim your space. But even when I was growing up, what space did women have? If, as most women did, you stood up and you said, I'm going to challenge this idea of the role of women in society, I'm going to challenge this notion that women must be judged in this kind of way. Can you imagine over centuries challenging the biblical notion of how women should be and should behave? Those notions that get entrenched in human culture create a space. And that is why when you look back, you'll find that so few great achievements in history are recorded as having been achieved by, for example, and many other examples, women, because the space wasn't there for them to do that. And you can imagine having 13 children and no conveniences and none of the technology we have today made it really difficult to do all of those things and be confined to the role of woman and still have the space. So that's why space is an important word. Opportunity is by definition a very important word. If you don't have the opportunity, you can't exercise your freedom to live a life you value. And then finally, the wherewithal. Even if you have an opportunity, the space and the right, if you can never get a bursary, or if you can't get to a decent school, or all of those sorts of things, you don't. So you've got to have a combination of factors, much of which the state has a duty to provide in service to you to live a life you value. And that is just what I want to emphasize, that freedom is a difficult concept in a final. And freedom means having the right, the space, the opportunity, and the wherewithal to live a life that you value, that you define as valuable to yourself. And it's not easy to do that, because the first thing we have to do, and most of you are spending a lot of time doing that right now, is to discover who you are. It's very difficult to know who you are. It's very difficult to know what motivates you, what your core values are, what floats your boat. It took me 3 decades to find out who I was, what motivated me, what things really turned me on in life, and what things I thought were valuable to pursue. Those things you don't know when you're small, even though the most common question that anyone asks a little girl is, what do you want to be when you grow up? You actually don't know, because you don't know who you are. And much of these years at university are the formative years in which you determine who you are and what you value and what kind of life you will value. And identity is obviously part of that. Identity is obviously part of that. But the critical thing is you have to be free to define your own identity. And the big divide between identity politics and the open society ideas proposed in Inkululeko is whether other people or the state has the right to impose an identity on you, or whether you as an individual have the right to determine which aspects of your personality create your identity. And that is really a very, very important distinction. We know, for example, that under apartheid, the state decided on your identity. It was a racial identity, and they had to, through the Population Registration Act, assign an identity to every person based on racial characteristics or assumed racial characteristics. And we even were crude enough to do things like the pencil test on people to decide which racial category they fell into. And everything about their life after that was determined by the racial category imposed on them by the state. Now that is the very antithesis of freedom, and something that everybody would reject, and something that is anathema to our Constitution. Now, today, this notion of people being defined by an identity determined by attributes over which they have no control has suddenly been presented as progressive. Now, I've spoken about race identity. Talking transformation primarily talks about gender identity, and both are branches of identity politics. Critical race theory, gender identity politics are all part of the great rubric of identity politics, where attributes over which you have no control are seen as defined by others about your value in society and about your rights to speak on certain subjects and about whether your views or your very being has value. And that is something that suddenly has become defined as progressive, and you can't distinguish it from the assumptions that underlay apartheid. It is indistinguishable from them. And there is nothing progressive about it at all. Now, I don't know if you've heard about a writer called Lionel Shriver. She's an American writer, and her name is Lionel, but she is a woman. And I just think that's a nice coincidence, because she is not obsessed with her identity. But she is one of the best writers on identity today. A really excellent writer. And I can identify with her so much because she has a very similar background to me, and she has very similar ideas to me. She says, I may be feebly interested in my German heritage, but should DNA analysis prove that my forebears were actually Bangladeshi, I'd throw a party. Yay, I'm not white, nothing's my fault. So you can see how she's saying, obviously she has a heritage that creates her identity. She's vaguely interested in it. But it wouldn't matter if a DNA test showed that she had an entire different genetic makeup and identity, because that is not how she defines who she is. And she said, if anything, she would throw a party because she would suddenly be relieved of this whole burden of identity that are imposed on her by others. That is just by the way. But this is more important. She says, and this is the identity politics movement. The identity politics movement insists that what we are is more important than who we are. That our lives derive their meaning from our membership of groups, that what happens to us isn't the product of our own decisions or actions, but of unequal power dynamics that are bigger than we are. Therefore, your complexion or your sex eclipses anything else about you. It denies your agency and your sense of being able to take choices about the world. It is actually a derivative of Marxism. Marxism saw the whole world as a contestation between the oppressors and the oppressed. And in many modern developed countries, that delineation doesn't work anymore. Because if you look at class, many people who were oppressed before are now in the middle class and in the upper classes. So it's been very simply aligned and transfused into a race debate where by definition the new oppression is by whiteness over everyone else in society. It's a new articulation of Marxism, because Marxist analysis was no longer holding in the arena of traditional class struggle, so it was given a racial dimension, a gender dimension, a disability dimension, and most of all an intersectionality dimension, so that the people with the most moral authority in society are the most oppressed if their levels of oppression all happen to intersect at the same space. So your identity becomes the reason for your oppression, not your class position. I hope I'm making that clear. I know I'm not giving a sociology lecture or a political science lecture, but it's really very important to understand that. And there is very little that distinguishes the underlying philosophy of that from apartheid. So let me read that again. The movement insists that what we are is more important than who we are, that our lives derive their meaning from our membership of groups, that what happens to us isn't the product of our own decisions and actions, but of unequal power dynamics that are bigger than we are and will always be bigger than we are. And therefore, irrespective of what your beliefs or your own personal sense of identity happen to be, if you happen to be a white heterosexual male, you are an oppressor by definition of that group identity. And I will come to the implications of that. But identity politics, she says, are overtly and explicitly racist because they are meant to be. They are meant to be. And we need to understand that there is absolutely nothing progressive about that position at all. Because apartheid said to us, demography is destiny. Identity politics says, demography is destiny. It uses a couple of other variables, but it nevertheless says your demography and factors over which you can do nothing. Your gender, your color, your sexuality are what define who you are. And that is what we fundamentally reject. Now, 1994 was supposed to bring freedom to South Africa. That's what was supposed to have happened then. But what happened? We slipped straight from one hegemonic system into another hegemonic system. We slipped from the hegemony of apartheid and the old National Party into the hegemony of another political party and into the politics of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Now you know about the Orwellian concept. Have you read Animal Farm? If there's one book you have to read, because it's the best book I have ever read, because it explains human beings so fundamentally in terms of a brilliant metaphor. That human beings like power, they like defining group identities to achieve power abuse. They abuse systems and structures to entrench individual power on the basis of dividing people between the good guys and the bad guys. And when the animals have overthrown the farmers, they develop the slogan, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, meaning animals are good and humans are bad. And then eventually sections of the animal population on the farm become the real dictators, mobilizing everyone around them still on the slogan of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. An absolute example of how you slip from one hegemony to another hegemony. And read that if you want to understand the transition in South Africa. So the truth is, we have never in South Africa given freedom a chance. We have never given freedom a chance, and I would like to explain what I mean by that. I often ask how it is possible that while our Constitution guarantees freedom and entrenches freedom and ensures that all the institutions of the Constitution are there to promote freedom, that we manage to slip straight from one hegemonic system to another hegemonic system. We've all heard of losing the battle but winning the war. The trouble is, with the Constitution, we won the war but lost the battle. Now, how does that work? We've all heard about snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. But how do you snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? That's a question I often ask myself about our Constitution. And how do we do that? First of all, freedom is very difficult. We were all used to one hegemonic system. Even people oppressed by apartheid were used to that hegemonic system in which the state determines all your rights and all your opportunities on the basis of race. And it's very easy to make a transition to a new system where the state must also determine all your rights and opportunities. Not merely give you an opportunity and make sure that you have the wherewithal to achieve the best that you can be. And so the entire notion of the state must deliver to me what I would like to become is the antithesis of the freedom that we understand. So, we made the transition from a hegemonic order to another hegemonic order without giving freedom a chance. And part of the reason was that in the late 1990s, the ANC had total hegemony over the moral high ground. To be a good person, you had to identify with the ANC. And I know that very personally because I was very strongly aligned with the ANC in the 1980s when it was dangerous to be so. But in the 1990s, and certainly when we had our first election, I decided it was time to oppose the ANC and build up a non-racial opposition to the ANC because I realized the greatest threat to freedom was too much power in too few hands. But that decision cost me many friends and cost me much of the quote-unquote legitimacy I had once enjoyed with the people who thought they occupied the moral high ground. Because the only good white in those days was an ANC white. Ergo, every other population group as well. And that is the antithesis of freedom. And then we had the concept of identity politics almost destroying our constitution without changing a word of it. How did that happen? It was because the ANC, with the moral high ground, decided that the state would have to reflect the political philosophy of the ANC. And they brought in the concept of cadre deployment, in which every single position in the state, the SABC, the Independent Electoral Commission, the prosecuting authority, the public protector, everybody had to reflect the political philosophy of the ANC. Now that is the dead opposite of what we mean by a state that protects the individual's right against the ruling party. And so, a single political party, and then a faction within that political party, when inevitably the political party was at war with each other, or within themselves, just as the animals on Animal Farm are at war with themselves, then one faction grabs power, and that faction then deploys its cadres to all of the key institutions of the state to establish and entrench its hegemony and power through the institutions that are supposed to protect individuals and society from abuse of that power. And so we had the very concept of hegemony and of identity being used to hollow out the meaning of our Constitution and the rule of law without changing a single word of it. And that is what state capture is. It wasn't an accident. It didn't happen by mistake. It was a deliberate policy. We've suddenly got the Zondo Commission there, looking at what, when, who. They better start looking at why and how, because that is the much more important issue. Why? because cadre deployment was seen as a moral policy covered with a fig leaf of BEE to ensure representativity. What it really was the identity politics of association with a faction in the ANC to control all the institutions, to manipulate those institutions for the protection of the power hierarchy, rather than to protect the individuals who have to be protected from power abuse by that power hierarchy. And so we saw state capture as a deliberate policy and inevitable outcome of cadre deployment. And nobody must think that that was some kind of mistake. And so you would think that at a time when all of this is being exposed by some very courageous people, that we would have a fight back for the values of our Constitution. Instead, what seems to be happening on our university campuses is to intensify and deepen identity politics, the very cause of the mess we're in, and have been in for many, many years. And it takes the students at Dagbreek to get it, and to stand up and say, if we're going to defend our Constitution and the rights within it, we had better stand up to do so. Because we have this Constitution, which has been hollowed out and rendered meaningless on our campus, because some people claim the only right to know the truth, which is the very antithesis of all of the rights and freedoms guaranteed in our Constitution, and we're too scared to stand up and say anything about it. I'm afraid far too many university administrators are too scared as well. And this is the importance and the significance of this event. We have to fight for the space that our Constitution guarantees us. We can't take it for granted. And if you look at the travesty that is happening on many American campuses, I wanted to use the example of Brett Weinstein from Evergreen State College, who resigned because the students would not let him have a different opinion when he challenged concepts of identity politics. And far closer to home, we see what happened to Professor Bongani Mayosi, whose own sister said that the politics of racial identity established and driven by the most intolerant version of fees must fall, which had nothing to do with fees by that stage. It was pure identity politics. When they vandalized his soul, that's what his sister said. He was an eminent scientist, living a life he valued. And let me go back to that definition. Living a life he valued meant having the right, the space, the opportunity, and the wherewithal to live a life he valued. Now, he was par excellence a scientist. He was already a scientist at primary school. He got a bursary to go to Mthatha High School, St. John's College in Mthatha. He did very well. He got a bursary to study medicine at the University of Natal. He did very well. He got a scholarship to Oxford. He did some pioneering work in heart disease, and in fact made the greatest discovery since the heart transplant in South Africa that happened so many years ago, by discovering the gene that leads to heart attacks in young and fit people, because there's a genetic link between that. He was a scientist. The life he valued was to study medicine, and especially cardiothoracic problems. He was lucky that even under apartheid he had the right to go to a decent school. His professor father offered him the space to do it. He had the opportunities, he had the wherewithal, and he was living the life he valued. A world-famous scientist here in South Africa. Suddenly you come with videos, I'm sure you've all seen that video, Science Must Fall. You must reject Western medicine. You must reject these things of whiteness. You must join the movement to eradicate the colonial legacy at our institution. And you can imagine why that vandalized his soul, because although he was obviously a very strong anti-apartheid activist and a very powerful proponent of the very students who were targeting them so that they could live a life that they valued. But he just couldn't reconcile the methodology and the pigeonholing with the life he wanted to live. And it cost him his life. And his sister, her name is Advocate Misa Mayosi, who also has the space and opportunity to live a life she values by being an advocate in the court of law, said about her brother. And so, we can see precisely why we have to give people the space and freedom to live a life that they value, and not to tell them that there are sellouts and Uncle Toms and racists, etc., to do so. And so, what we need to do is find a response to this. Now, we don't want to respond in the way that so many people in the United States have responded and in other parts of the world, which is to say, okay, you want to go to identity politics, we can do identity politics too. That's one of the responses. If you want to do identity politics, you watch how we do identity politics and mobilize around it. The second way, which we've seen far too much of, is jammer dat ek leef attitude. Sorry that I'm alive, so sorry that I've got a white skin, so sorry that I'm a male, so sorry that I'm a heterosexual, and how can I serve the cause of identity politics by keeping quiet and whipping myself into submission? That's not a way to respond either. And Lionel Schreiber writes some brilliant things about that. She said, some white liberals, I don't like the way that Americans use the word liberal, it's the absolute antithesis of liberal. But some white identitarians, if we put that into the picture there, will continue to compete over who can seem more ashamed of who they are in an effort to earn themselves out of their skin color. And she says, sorry guys, it doesn't work, and anything nasty you say about white people also applies to you. But all the other pale faces won't necessarily tolerate being told that Caucasians, that's white people obviously, alone cannot be regarded as a cohesive people, cannot experience solidarity, cannot feel communal pride, cannot fight back when slandered or stereotyped, cannot advocate for their interests, and cannot ever feel sorry for themselves. And that fight back of identity politics is precisely what will drive South Africa apart. You can see that already we have movements for coloured identity, the Gatvol movement in the Western Cape. You have the drive to race identity across the board. And if that succeeds, we're going to have to bring something like apartheid back, because it is apartheid, which is the last thing I want and should be the last thing that any of us wants. Our challenge is to build a South African nationhood where everyone has the right, the freedom, the wherewithal, the space, and the means to identify who they are and to live a life they value. Being white or having a Greek heritage may be important to some people. It may be completely unimportant to other people. But that's your right and your freedom. I think 90% of white South Africans want a non-racial and inclusive society to work. And the great fear that I have is that the backlash to this extreme form of identity politics will be another form of racial mobilization that can only lead to escalating conflict. Now maybe that is the way of the world. Maybe ethnicity and racial nationalism is such a powerful primeval force that that's how human beings are going to live till the end of time. But I can't believe that. Planet is shrinking, people are moving all over this world, and we're going to have to find ways of enabling debate and dialogue to happen around ideas, principles, and values in the search for truth, rather than in contestations between groups based on an identity that you can do nothing about and that you may not even want to identify with. And South Africa has an enormous responsibility in this regard. We've been working in this direction for longer than almost any other society, even though America and places in Europe can boast about their value systems. But they live in homogenous societies. And it's much easier to do that kind of thing there. Wait till you have the movement of migrants all over the world, as we can see with people dying in the Mediterranean and other things. So we have a unique responsibility to show that it is possible in building one nation, one future, in which every individual's rights to be themselves, to live a life they value, so they can have true freedom. And let me get back to the definition, that every individual can have the right, the space, the opportunity, and the wherewithal to live a life you value. And if we don't establish those fundamentals on a university campus, it's going to die in society. Because university graduates become the thought multipliers in the society. They become the professionals. They become the communicators. They become the people whose ideas are seen to set the intellectual tone in society. To the extent that when there is a zeitgeist shift, we all live on campus now, the same goes. And so it makes it all the more important, and in fact critical, to preserve the space. To preserve the space of debate, of dialectic analysis, of searching for the truth, of contesting ideas, of the rights and freedoms to establish your own identity. Because South Africa will fail if our universities fail to defend that space. And so I'm saying to Dagbreek, you are punching far above your weight here. You're a student organization, a student committee in a residence of the university, doing something on the cutting edge of where all our universities should be, but none has the guts to be. So I want to say, well done, guys. You might be marginalized now, you might be spat at now, so what? Every great reformer has been marginalized and spat at. You just have to think of poor old Martin Luther, there with the Holy Roman Emperor, and no rights and no rules to defend him. Or Galileo, when he said, actually, the Earth revolves around the sun, and they wanted to hang him up. Don't think about what is right in the moment in terms of other people's opinions. Think into the future, 10, 20 years, and look back and say, what will we think would have been right then? And that is the mindset of every great reformer. So guys, you are right on the cutting edge. And I hope you do many more projects, and I wish you all the strength in the world for having the guts to exercise your freedoms, which very few South Africans have, and for fighting for the space under the Constitution to make sure that future generations simply take their freedoms for granted because people like you had the guts to stand up for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Premier Zille. Your words are so important and necessary at this time. It has been an absolute honor listening to you. I mean, the way you linked with Animal Farm was just brilliant. I would now like to ask the chairperson of Dagbreek Student Affairs, Esvia, to present a gift to the Premier.
Declare it, eh? Yeah.
I will now open the floor for question and answers for about 25 minutes. General questions and questions related to the Premier's speech can be directed at the Premier. Questions about the booklet can be directed at Tion. Please queue up and you can have a seat somewhere towards the front here. There are open seats. You will have 15 to 20 seconds to ask your question, after which you will be cut off. Once you have asked your question, please be seated again. Thank you.
Okay, so my question is about sort of this PC culture. political correctness culture. Many of us are afraid to share and speak about ideas that we hold, and I see it a lot in female residences where people with non-politically correct ideas are afraid to stand for hardcore because of they see the space as hostile to these ideas. So just maybe some advice that you have for people like that, Ms. Helen Zille, for people who are afraid to share ideas. What can the general guy on the street do to address this problem of freedom from speech, so to speak?
Okay, let's take one question at a time. My advice literally is to read the booklet, and that is a genuine piece of advice. If you read Inkululeko, you will see that it will give you a lot of arguments and a lot of insights to see through the sophistry of the arguments that the intolerant people use. Because often they will accuse you of being something when they have got no logical argument to rebut what you say. I would also advise you to read writers like Lionel Schreiber. She is really good. And there are many others like her who are equally insightful. There is a journal, it's in the Canadian Journal, called Quillette. Quillette. Now that's a nice play on words, because quill is an old-fashioned pen. And this journal was started by a woman who refused to be pigeonholed by the identitarian movement. So she started this journal, ironically called Quillette. And it writes the most brilliant articles on this. Also, you must follow at Michael Cardo on Twitter. He often, or at Leon Schreiber, always confusing, Leon Schreiber on Twitter. They really post links to some of the best articles on these issues. So if you want arguments, Google is your best friend. Read Lionel Schreiber, read Leon Schreiber, and look at what Michael Cardo, C-A-R-D-O, posts. They post really good stuff on this debate. The best introduction, I think, that there exists is this Inkululeko booklet. So read that through as well. Then all will also be alive to debates. Yesterday, Jamie Oliver, do you know who Jamie Oliver is? Jamie Oliver was accused of cultural appropriation because he developed something called jerk rice, or rice jerk, or whatever it is, which is a dish based on some Jamaican thing. And the left wing preserved and said, you may not steal things from a culture and appropriate it as your own. So he said, excuse me, the very essence of good food is cultural appropriation. What are you talking about? We borrow from each other's cultures all the time. Otherwise, we'd still be eating boiled meat and boiled spinach in Britain, right? So because Britain's way behind on the food chain. So the point is that cultural appropriation is the very essence of improving cuisine in any culture. And so it is the same in improving ideas and searching for the truth. So he was slammed because he took this Jamaican idea and transferred it from meat to rice. And he said, I'm not apologizing. I do this all the time. Now, the one thing that we can often get into is apologizing. And don't take me down that road. Don't take me down that road. But if you believe in your ideas, you need to argue your point. And sometimes it's very difficult, especially when you're young, to come up with your arguments. I've got a million arguments because I've thought these things through so many times. And when I was a student, I was too terrified to go against the grain. When I was at full hall at UCT, the very first week I was there as what they called a freshette, which makes me cool. We had to do what they called the cattle parade, which every first year had to wear the miniest skirt that she had and walk down a ramp so the boys from Smuts Hall could bid for you, like a cattle parade, genuinely. Now, if anything was imposing an identity on you as a piece of meat where the value of your character was dependent on your value of your legs or what other people thought your legs were like, that is a form of identity politics. And I rebelled internally, but didn't have the guts to stand up and say, this is bullshit. I'm not going to play this game. So that's how you formulate your ideas. You don't even know why you're feeling so bad about it, but you have to formulate the idea and the response to it. And today with connectivity and Google, you can find so many ideas that will help you formulate your arguments. But start by reading Inkululeko. It's a really good start.
Good evening, Mrs. Zille. Essential sort of life principle to me is critical thinking, and with that, I actively want to pursue a career within politics. I'm fascinated by the industry, how it works, really is a passion of mine. So in light of that, I would like to ask a question around your tweets about colonialism. I'm not here to discuss whether colonialism is good or bad, that's not my point of view.
Colonialism was bad, believe me, it was. Its legacy is mixed.
So, I don't want to focus on that. For more, what I want to ask about, there's two questions. It's one, why would you choose to address a topic, a controversial, heated topic like colonialism, especially with the political affiliation that you have? And then secondly, why would you choose to do that on a very volatile and hostile platform like Twitter, especially when you're limited to the amount of characters you can use in explaining your statements?
Thank you very much for that question. The easiest thing there is in the kind of distorted debate that the previous question was referring to is to decontextualize and distort someone's argument. It's the very easiest thing to do. And you know, if you write another booklet, please, Tian, include that concept in it. Decontextualization and distortion. Because I believe that you have to write big, long theoretical papers, and I have written many, many of those, and you have to write popular newspaper articles. But you must also be totally free to use modern social media to get ideas across. Now, the context was my visit to Singapore. And I was looking very closely at Singapore, where I had an amazing experience. Because it was amazing because 45 to 50 years ago, that country was a mosquito-infested swamp. Absolutely poor, not even basic fresh water, no arable land to grow anything, colonized by the Brits and by others before them, desperately, desperately poor. With a few things the Brits had established, such as a port and a few training colleges. And when Lee Kuan Yew became the first leader of Singapore after the end of British colonialism, his analysis was a very interesting one across a whole range of issues, and I've read his biography twice. But his analysis was, we have to decide what to discard and what to build on from what the British left. Critical insight. We have to decide what to build on and what to discard and what to repurpose. And so, you will see in his writings, he said, one thing the Brits did leave us was a port. And they left us with the idea that Singapore could be the greatest logistics hub in the world because of our geographic location. And that's precisely what he did. The British left him with a few technical colleges that had been for whites only at the time. And he said, we can turn ourselves into a hub of training and technical and vocational expertise that beats the rest of the world. And he has done that in every single sphere, from mathematics to beauty therapy. And you go to Singapore, and in a generation or two, there is not a single person who lives in poverty that I could see in that place. And their currency was one of the strongest in the world at the time. And their non-oil exports, when I was there last year, had grown by 15% year on year. That's the kind of things they were making and exporting. And I was really intrigued by this. Because they were decolonized at roughly the same time as Zimbabwe, if I remember correctly. Zimbabwe had far more going for it at the time. It had significant infrastructure, unlike Singapore. It had significant institutions, unlike Singapore. It had huge agricultural lands and infrastructure and schools and everything you can imagine. And while I was in Singapore, I read the distinction between what was going on in both countries. Of course, I'm very well versed with Zimbabwe, but at that particular time, Zimbabwe was moving back to cattle and goats barter as a form of legal tender, while Singapore had the most valuable currency in the world. Now, how does that happen? And what are the factors, I ask myself? Because both countries were colonized by the same colonizing power. Both countries had roughly the same amount of people. Today, a third of Zimbabweans are out of that country to survive. In Singapore, no one wants to leave that country, especially if they have children, because they're not going to get as good an education anywhere else in the world for their children if they go anywhere. Today, the Zimbabweans are desperately poor in the main, except for a small corrupt elite. And in Singapore, there's literally as little corruption as you could want anywhere in the world, and the place is going forward. And I try to analyze point by point what it was. And I put out a 6-point tweet around what it had been that had transformed Singapore. Because it was the only question I asked in the whole week that I was there: why? And every single person said, amongst many things, one of the things we did was what we did not destroy entirely the legacy of colonialism, but we built on certain aspects and repurposed them. And you go around Singapore today and you find there's the Riddles Biotechnology Institute, there's the Riddles Boulevard, there's the Riddles Hotel, which is the most famous hotel in Singapore. There's this, no, I'm sorry, Raffles, I'm not talking about Riddles, Raffles. And I said to them, how can everything be called Raffles in this place? Raffles was like Cecil John Rhodes. And this was just at the time when Rhodes was tall, of course. And I said, how can you call everything Raffles here? And he was the biggest colonialist and imperialist you can imagine. And they said, well, we know he was, and we know he was many bad things, but he also planted many good things on which we built and which we perfected. And I thought, damn, you know, at a time when Zimbabwe is still blaming Britain and still blaming whites for every problem in the country, here is Singapore saying we have to distinguish between what we can build on and what we need to destroy. That's surely a very important insight for South Africa right now. And you ask me, why do I say what I do now and from the position I'm coming from? It's because South Africa at this time can choose still whether we go the way of Zimbabwe or whether we go the way of Singapore. And there are critical factors that we need to determine if we want to make the choice that will benefit our children and their children. And I've just seen the Science Must Fall video on how to decolonize science. I don't know if you've seen that video. Well, you all should if you haven't. Because every Western scientific idea in that video must fall, including Newton's theory of gravity. Listen to it. Don't know how you get into an aeroplane without understanding that, but nevertheless. All Newton's laws of motion, for example. So I'm saying to myself, we better learn this lesson now. Because if we're going to drive decolonization as a principle, we are going to end up like Zimbabwe and not like Singapore. Colonialism was bad. It was driven by evil intentions. It was driven by extractive motives, but it happened. Now, are we going to destroy everything, or are we going to repurpose some of the things, like university campuses, to build a better country and not destroy everything? One of the reasons that Zimbabwe's education is frankly better for black people than South Africans, much better, is because Jonathan Jansen says that they kept the A levels and the O levels and didn't discard those for African learners. And so they met the standards and gave their learners such a great opportunity because they kept those aspects of colonialism, ironically, in Zimbabwe. So what I was saying was we had better learn the factors that distinguish a successful transition from a failed transition. And then I said one of the factors was that Singapore built on the positive aspects of colonialism's legacy. That was my tweet. And the world started falling down, and I said, for those who think the legacy of colonialism was only negative, think of, and then I mentioned a whole range of things from our independent judiciary to our transport infrastructure. And then the whole world fell down even more. I'm still puzzling about that to this day. But I have learned a lot about the Russian troll and bot farms, the IRA, the Internet Research Agency. And if you don't know about it, you can read about how 13 people, assuming 3,000 identities, swung the American election to Donald Trump on the basis of what's called bots and sock puppets and social media. And so I had my whole social media feed analyzed by an expert, especially when Twitter did the bot and sock puppet count to take away fake accounts that were there to generate outrage deliberately. And the results are totally fascinating. Totally fascinating. There were more fake accounts on my timeline at the time than I think they were in trying to influence the American election. I've got to completely confirm that. I'm not 100% sure, but it looked pretty much like it. So I'm telling you, manufactured outrage is the key thing about social media. And manufactured outrage has a greater chilling effect on the freedom of speech than even these identitarians who run around campuses. In the end, you end up apologizing for your ideas and your beliefs, not because anybody has come up with a better argument, but because the outcry and the manufactured outrage is so massive that you think, to hell with it, I'm not going to take it. So that's why I said what I said. South Africans better wake up right now that we can go the way of Singapore, we can go the way of Zimbabwe. And if we're going to deny anybody to say anything that there are some legacies from the past that we need to repurpose and build on, then we're definitely going the way of Zimbabwe. So I hope that answers your question. You mustn't ask me such good questions, then I'll answer them much shorter.
My question is in a little bit different vein. It's about reconciliation. Just looking at how all identity politics and a lot of politics is being driven today is a lot of using emotional trigger points in that sense from the past. How do you think reconciliation could play a part in building a unified future for South Africa? And how do you think could remembering our past, looking at the significance of the Truth and Reconciliation that played a role in 1994 and this was planned in the future of South Africa?
Look, I think reconciliation is very important. It also requires restitution and it requires justice. There's no question about that. It's not kind of some superficial feel-good thing. And that is why I speak so much about freedom involving the means, the wherewithal, the opportunity, and the space, which are all factors of restitution. So I really do believe that reconciliation is a very powerful thing, but it involves looking at the structural divisions in the society as well. I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was an interesting exercise in managing the transition so that we could deal with the past in a way that didn't tear apart our society. I don't think it fulfilled its objectives fully, and I can understand why many people feel alienated by it, but it was a necessary mechanism at the time. I'm trying to keep my answers a lot shorter. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. A question for you, I want to ask you about the issue of ownership. I would like to know
ownership.
Yes. Do you think that this freedom that we are speaking of can be achieved within our current state? Where people you see don't have ownership to issues such as renters. Looking at
such as land, you see?
Yes, land. You see, we need land. Our people need land. And again, the issue of the economical sectors, there's still a huge gap of inequality. So, when we speak of this freedom, don't you think that we should look at the issues of citizenship? Like, for instance, looking at care leaves and what's this, Uganda, you see, where, like, I mean, before looking at freedom, you see, they did what they tried to seek to do what, to resolve the issues of balancing ownership in terms of land, because, like, I mean, land, you see, is an important aspect, you see, that brings back the dignity. We speak of freedom because we had colonialism. You see, that's why we have freedom today. That's why we speak of freedom. Therefore, do you think that this freedom is achievable if certain mistakes of the past are not done, what are not rectified? Can we achieve this freedom? Thank you very much.
Look, I absolutely do agree that land reform is essential, and that the ideal would be if every single South African family has land ownership. That would be a very, very important step towards the freedom in the definition that I gave. Because because land ownership in a modern economy gives families collateral that enables them to use an asset to advance themselves in the economy. And that is very important. So absolutely, I do believe that land ownership is pivotal. I also believe that colonialism was responsible for dispossession, obviously, and it was one of its very evil legacies, and one that we have to rectify. With that, I agree entirely. We must also do it from a base of understanding the facts at the moment. Now, I've looked very carefully at the land audits that have been done so far, and they mostly agree. I was amazed to learn, when I first looked at the land audits, that if you look at all the land in black hands, in a province like KwaZulu-Natal, amazingly, 72% of the land is in black hands. 72%. Now that includes all the land under communal ownership. That includes the Ingonyama Trust. That includes all the state-owned land. That includes all the farms that have already been restituted. That is a huge amount. Now, KwaZulu-Natal is the most. I'll come to the provinces that have less. And when Cyril Ramaphosa talks about land reform in that context, he says we have to move from communal ownership to individual ownership. We have to move to security of tenure of the peasants living in that land, because until they have secure tenure, they can never leverage their ownership of land to advance economically. And there's an immediate outcry from King Goodwill Zwelithini, who says you don't touch our communal land, which means that millions of people who live on the land and work on the land do so at the pleasure of the king. And if they irritate the king or one of the chiefs, they're off the land. So they've got absolutely no security of tenure. And that is one of the great areas that land reformers need, to give people security of tenure and ownership of the land they work. Another great area that we need land reform is in the urban areas. So, for example, if you're looking at the large tracts of land in Cape Town that the national government owns, we've done a calculation which says that close to 100,000 affordable units can be built on the land the government owns, well-located land, that we can do with subsidies and private cross-subsidization to make that land affordable for ownership for disadvantaged people with title deeds. That's a critical thing, title deeds. Most of those people are never going to work the lands and try and make a living from farming. They're urban citizens who are going to make their living in an urban context. And what gives them muscle in a modern economy is land ownership. Land ownership is the very basis of muscle and leverage in a market-based economy. But the entire debate in South Africa doesn't focus on those areas of land reform. It focuses on redistributing productive farmlands. Now, the number of farmers farming productive farms have dwindled dramatically in South Africa. I think they've dropped from about 78,000 to 38,000, or something in that order of magnitude. I can't vouch for those figures, they're just in the back of my mind. Now let me give you an example of what would happen. Focusing on expropriation without compensation of productive farmland. You can take any town, including Stellenbosch, that is surrounded by farmlands. And you start saying to farmers, we are going to expropriate your farm without compensation for restitution. That farmer is going to say, okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do is have to sell my movable assets, my irrigation systems, everything that I can to get at least something out of the farm. So you can start a new life somewhere else, buy a small property in town or whatever it is. But he hasn't owned that farm. He's got a bond of at least 5 million to the bank on that farm. So he stops paying his bond because it's taken away without compensation. Why should he pay his bond? No one can come and take anything from him. So he gets off the farm and suddenly the bank has a bad debt of 5 million rand. And property prices collapse. And then people have bonds on their property that are worth more than the property themselves, and they stop paying. And the banking system collapses. That's not a bogeyman argument, it's just a fact. That when property collapses, the banking system collapses, because most properties are owned by the banks, and people are paying them off and borrowing more money to develop their farms and develop their properties. And when that happens and farmers move away, the towns die because most towns in rural areas exist to support farming communities with all kinds of services, legal services, market services, banking services, printing services, whatever you can imagine, schools, hospitals. And as the platteland dies, as the rural areas die, the towns die. And people lose their jobs. And hundreds of thousands of people on farms lose their jobs. And new farmers come onto those farms. They can't borrow money because the bank hasn't got any money to lend them because the banking system is teetering and collapsing. And they've got to start making those farms viable. It's a system that's going to collapse this economy, collapse jobs, and collapse food security. That does not mean to say that there should not be land reform. There should be massive land reform. Massive land reform. Where people want to live and where people are working. And they should own their land. And they should have title to their land. And they should be able to leverage their ownership of that land. For example, to start businesses, because then when they own land, they can borrow money from the bank against that collateral. I've been writing since 2006, when I became mayor, for the release of Winfield for affordable housing, for the release of Youngsfield, for the release of the transfer in Inkululeko, for the release of Denel, for this kind of transfer, and it never happens. And now the national government announces they're going to sell that land at top dollar to bail out state-owned enterprises that have collapsed on exactly the same system they want to impose on the farming land. So instead of expropriating functional farms, let's look at our most fertile land, which is along the eastern seaboard, KwaZulu-Natal, the Eastern Cape. In the Eastern Cape, 45% of all land is in black hands. Not as high as 72%, but 45%. Most of it is not producing any jobs or food. And that has to be the benchmark. Is land producing food and jobs? If not, why not? How can we fix that and increase black ownership and title to the land? So I'm completely with you that ownership and title to the land is critical in a way that makes it productive in terms of food and in terms of jobs. That's our position on that. I hope that makes sense.
Greetings, Premier.
Okay, I've only got time for 1 or 2 short answers. I'm so sorry. You keep on asking me such in-depth questions that I've got to, okay.
I have been named Simon first. My question arises from, I think, a point you made when you said that there's no future in the identity identity politics. So now, as a young person, and then looking at where we're standing today as a country, with the Rainbow Nation as a Rainbow Nation country, and considering also our differences as diverse as we are. So would you maybe, are you maybe in support of things, or the implementation maybe of a one-party government in terms of reconciling us and uniting us and working towards a better future for all that lives in the country? Maybe would you support the implementation of a one-party government? Because
it's an interesting question. I've got to thank you very much for asking. It's a very interesting question. The question looks at the fact that if we don't believe in identity politics, why don't we go for a one-party state? Because then we can all reconcile together in the same party and not have this kind of contestation that the questioner implies inevitably revolves around identity. Now, identity is important, but you have to choose your identity. When I meet you and when I see you, I don't judge you by anything except the content of your character and your value as a human being. And I let you decide on your identity, whether it's race, whether that's important to you or not important to you, whether it's sexuality, whether it's color, gender, whatever. Now everyone has an identity and people shape their identity. Maybe being a vegetarian or a hockey player is more important to your identity than being white or being something else. Who knows? For no one else to define but you. So identity is important, but I don't like the politics of imposed identity. Because you are black, you must assume to say this, and if you don't say that, they call you a sellout and a traitor like Professor Mayosi. That's identity politics gone mad, because he's allowed to choose his own identity and not have it imposed on him by people who share his skin color. So I do not believe in the one-party state, even though I strongly believe in the right to freely choose your identity. And I do not believe in a one-party state, although I strongly believe in reconciliation for one simple reason. No human being is right all the time, and no human being or group of human beings has all the answers all the time. And so, we will both start, me and someone who belongs to any other party, we could both start by saying, the moral purpose is to beat poverty in South Africa. That's certainly what I believe is the moral purpose, to beat poverty in South Africa. And in order to do this, these are my policies. But you could say to me, I don't agree with your policies and I don't believe that they will beat poverty. So I will tell you now, these are my policies. And then we have to convince other people that our policies will achieve the goal that we say they will achieve. And that's why you have to have contestation. And it doesn't mean to say that there has to be identity politics or war or conflict. It means that human beings are fallible and don't always know. And they have to have a right to change their mind. And the multi-party system exists precisely for that reason. To enable people to say, we defend the Constitution, we want to beat politics, and we want to beat poverty, this is our solution. And you can stand up and say, we want to do that, we've got a different solution. And then people just make up their mind and they can follow one solution and realize, oh, this is taking us in a dead opposite direction than we thought it would take us, let's change our minds. But if you're stuck in identity politics, you will never change your mind because the color or the sex of the person speaking is more important than the idea that they're proposing. And that's what we have to get away from. I hope that's explained it as best as I can, because I'm getting in trouble here. One more, brief. I will. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Dagbreek, for having this for us. I'd just like to ask two questions, limited to two. So, Madam, you spoke about building on what colonialism left, and that's
no, the legacy.
On the positive legacies. Can you then state what is it that was positive that colonialism left in South Africa? And you mentioned specifically things like hospitals and infrastructure. So, do you then, in the same statement, acknowledge that colonialism disrupted the African process of having these things that you approach from the colonial legacy. And secondly, I just want to ask the Dagbreek Student Association. Tian, when you opened, you made some rather strong statements, but I just want to ask you something. In what event have you been involved in on campus where you have come out in a student dialogue, for instance, with fees must fall, with rape culture, and how have you been able to draw the crowd that is here to other diverse conversations that have been happening? Because to be completely honest, this is the first time I've ever seen so many group of white students attend a talk, and I've been to a few on campus. So I just want to know, what is your track record of promoting inclusive dialogues on campus?
Okay, thank you very much for that. The history of the whole world, just like the history of the development of cuisine, is the history of ideas that have been shared, but mostly by conquest. There are, I think, 3 or 4 countries in the world that have never been colonized. There are 4 that I know of. One is Japan, one is Thailand, one is Ethiopia, and one is Liberia. Now, Britain was a backward, swampy place inhabited by tribal people in skins when they were colonized by the Romans. The Romans had developed the concept of a state. They had developed the concept of law. They had developed the concept of carrying water long distances on aquifers, and all of that the British knew nothing about. They colonized Britain, they subjugated the British people, they defeated them, and they left a lot of those things. And if you look anywhere in the world, if you look at Vietnam, oh my goodness, what a place to go. Colonized for 1,000 years by the Chinese, 200 brutal years by the French, then the American conquest. And that place is now got the fastest growing economy in the world and huge inclusivity. And I've spoken to a lot of people there about the legacies on which they're building. So it is a simple fact of human progress that we learn from each other, and often not in pleasant ways, but in fighting wars with each other. Now that doesn't mean to say it's right. It's profoundly evil, and those conquests were all about the benefit of the conquerors. There's no question about that. But in the process, they bought technology and other things that the conquered could build on over time. And the pendulum swings, and no power remains the power forever. It's very interesting to look now to see that by 2035, the Chinese economy will have overtaken the American economy. And the whole balance of power in the world will shift. And they've done that actually by switching more and more to a market-based economy and a productive economy in China. And China is a fascinating example that I've known a lot about. And why? Civilization first developed in the basin in the Middle East where the Tigris and Euphrates come together. And it developed there, in my understanding, and I may be wrong, because any individual may be wrong, because organized agriculture developed there. And the minute organized agriculture developed, so people weren't just scratching a piece of ground for their own food, or running around there looking for nuts and berries and killing animals to survive. The minute organized agriculture happened, some people produced a surplus and freed other people to do other things. And that's how towns and cities developed. And towns and cities brought ideas and social organization and culture and advances. And those spread from there all over the world, often by people massively in conflict. The first cradle of humanity was here, where we live, in southern Africa, and the first culture was here. But the development of that culture into those kinds of human organizations we saw happened when human beings had spread from southern Africa and happened around the Tigris and Euphrates, where they are in the Middle East. And it's fascinating to read about how those spread throughout the world, not by friendly methods, but by conquest, and by wars, and by terrible setbacks. And each one of them were driven by conquerors with evil intentions, and with intentions of conquest and subjugation. And it's a fact that across the globe, sometimes, for example, when the Dark Ages swept Britain, swept Europe, all of that was wiped out, but people fought back and came back from that. And so, sometimes it can have negative consequences for a very long time. So now, in South Africa, because of climatic factors and a whole range of other factors, there was not a lot of what we would call development in the modern sense of the word when the colonialists came in. And certainly they weren't looking to benefit the local community, not at all. That wasn't part of the agenda. But if I have to look at the things that were left, I think that transport infrastructure is a very important one. And I think that the written word is a very important one. Very, very important one. Maybe some people would think the concept of a church and religion, of course there's always been religion, but the church, as we understand the formal church, may well be one of them. I don't know. Some people are agnostic and atheists, so that wouldn't count as a blessing for them at all. So while there were many, many negative aspects of colonialism, and colonialism was a system of conquest, no question about it, its legacies can be repurposed and built on. Now you asked me about the counterfactual of would indigenous communities have developed all of these things without that? Well, who knows? I don't know. And I don't know how long it would have taken, and I don't know in what direction it would have been. All I know is that development throughout the world has been a product of conquest, of fight back, of resolution. Just like the progress in ideas in times of peace is a process of contesting ideas. And what makes us a modern democracy is that we don't have to kill each other and fight to impose our ideas. We have a democracy in which we can differ with each other and ask people to support our arguments because they're free to exercise a vote rather than to kill each other to impose their ideas. So, that's my only answer I can give you. And I don't believe that colonialism was good at all, but I don't think that we should go the way of saying, let's wipe out its legacy to the point of decolonizing our currency and going back to barter.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to keep it really short. See the Premier's bodyguards on getting nervous back there.
No, they don't have to worry. You don't have to worry. They only getting nervous because they see the flexing your muscles.
Thank you very much. So thank you for the question. So my track record of attending events started in first year, and I attended the rare culture discussions, the critical discussions. This year I was in the critical engagement forum, and I always encountered the same mantra, and it's a mantra of your voice is not a priority here, and it links directly back to what my identity is, who I am. And it takes a strong mind to persist in attending these types of events once you've been told at your first one that your voice is not prioritized here. You don't get to speak on certain matters. And it's because the philosophy of identity politics is so entrenched on our campus and on other campuses in South Africa that I had this experience. And if you remember, the Premier said in her speech, so the first reaction to identity politics could be an equal backlash, right? A backlash on identity politics. The second possible reaction could be people saying, I'm sorry that I'm alive, and withdrawing, in essence. And I think, to answer your question, if you are on the wrong side of identity politics, you withdraw. You don't want to face the threats of being labelled, of being marginalised, of being told your voice is not a priority, and you'd rather sit in your residence room. And I'm also very delighted to see that we have so many students here tonight that normally they don't tend to turn up to these type of discussions. And it's because for the first time the message has been sent out that tonight we're not discussing identity. The identity won't define the parameters of our discussions and the merits of what's being said, but we're going to be discussing ideas. And Thursday we had a great meeting with the Transformation Office, and we vowed to reimagine conversations on campus in a way that supposes that, or that commits to the idea of not having identity defining the discussion, not to prioritize certain voices. Because I mean, to think of it, who decides what voices should enjoy priority? Who gets to decide that? And that's when you get tyranny, when a small group of people that have the monopoly of ideas and discussions on campus, they get to decide whose opinion is worthy of being expressed based on identity. And that's why these people don't, I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of these people don't turn up for the discussion, because it's always the same mantra of you can sit at the back, but your voice is not a priority. And I think leaving this venue tonight, the greatest thing that we can commit to is to reimagine debate and conversation on campus, and to leave identity behind to the greatest extent possible, because identity is important, as the Premier said, but we want people to define identity, to decide what identity do I belong to, or does it even matter? And we want people to turn up to discussions